Backwards compatibility. It's a thing that would be nice if all of the game consoles had it, wouldn't it? But they don't. For a long time, none of them had it. A couple console generations is a lot. I mean, it's a little murkier than that, but go with me here. Gamers talk about this all the time. So why don't we have it? The demand is there, why not supply? But things don't work like that, do they? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question, what keeps backwards compatibility off of game consoles? Near the end of 2015, Microsoft added Xbox and Xbox 360 backwards compatibility to the Xbox One for select games. It actually upscales them too in a lot of cases and does things like force VSync and filter texture. I mean, it's actually pretty good, but it's not like full backwards compatibility. It's emulators that are basically tuned to run various games. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going after that. I think that's good. I actually very much commend Microsoft for doing that. I like me some backwards compatibility. That should basically be the answer, right? Just do what Microsoft did, right? Well, I mean, part of it is that the Microsoft platform is more or less not as different as the various console generations of PlayStations. For one, Microsoft has usually based their underlying software on some of the Microsoft Windows components. I'm not going to say it's Microsoft Windows because it's not, but the Xbox shares some code, some technology, uses PC components, especially the original Xbox, which really used PC components. And that right there should give us some understanding as to why Microsoft has done it. Well, Sony really hasn't, and Nintendo kinda has, but not really. So every PlayStation generation has more or less been utterly and completely different from the previous one. The original PlayStation ran a CPU that is not similar to the, at the time, cutting-edge CPU in the PlayStation 2. In fact, the PlayStation 2 used the original PlayStation 1's CPU as a sound processing unit. And that's actually the reason why the PS2 was able to play the PS1's games. It had a PS1 CPU right there. The PS3 was actually a pretty similar situation. Some of the PlayStation 2's hardware, it was just there, it was in there. And the reason why they took it out was because the PlayStation 3 cost $600. That's too much for a game console. Seriously, that's a laughable price for a game console. And that's way back in the 2000s, when money was worth more than it is now, because money is always worth less over time. Like, that $600 was worth about $750 in today's money. So imagine doing the work of getting $750 for a game console, and you'll understand why they took the PS2 hardware out. That doesn't mean it's good they took out the backwards compatibility, because actually that really sucks, but still, you actually needed the PS2 hardware in the machine in order to emulate it, and I'll tell you why. The PlayStation 3 was a lot more advanced than the PS2, but not so much more advanced. It could run a virtual machine of the PS2, because let's be frank, that's what backwards compatibility is, if not hardware, then pretend hardware. When you run emulation, you are running a virtual machine. It acts as if all of the pieces of hardware exist in what is best described as a virtual space. Here's the thing about that. Because the pieces of hardware are inherently different, when you send a command to a PS2 processor, it's not going to be the same as if you sent that same type of command to a PS3 processor. So the software isn't just a PlayStation 2 in a PlayStation 3. The software would have to be an interpreter that acts as an intermediate so that the emulation can occur. Give me 10 bytes to the PlayStation 2 might be move those 10 bytes over to me, which are two differently worded sentences that mean the same thing. So you're spending time translating code in real time to a different kind of code. That's what an emulator is. And that's why they put the PS2 hardware into the PS3 when they tried to emulate it, because that takes a lot of horsepower, a surprisingly large amount. So it may be nice that you can just play older Microsoft Xbox games on a current generation Xbox, but it's because they more or less have used hardware that requires less of that kind of jostling. The other console makers have resorted to coming up with more of a, you can buy this classic console, it's smaller and cooler and is a collector's item approach that I don't necessarily like, but I also don't know that there's really an ideal situation per se. Here's the big issue with backwards compatibility. It does require effort, because like I said, even on the Xbox, it's simply an emulator that is tuned to specific games to ensure those games work properly. Even though they have to do less on the Xbox, it's still a different platform. But here's the issue with that emulation on the Xbox One. According to data pulled by ARS Technica, not a lot of people do that. Gamers spend roughly 1.5% of their time revisiting old Xbox 360 titles. When Microsoft originally launched the feature, they said users had spent 9 million hours playing Xbox 360 games on the Xbox One. That sounds like a lot, but over the course of a month, people spend about 3.2 million hours watching gameranx videos, and our videos take about 10 minutes out of your day. That's not how much people play video games. People play video games a lot more than that. So it's not to say there isn't a demand. I think we all want to have the ability to play old games, but it has been shown that when we do have it, we don't necessarily do that, which is, I don't know, maybe a little disappointing to me, honestly. We do know that the PlayStation 5 may have backwards compatibility, as Sony filed a patent in 2016 that was granted recently that would allow them to emulate older games using their hardware, which, I mean, actually is good. I imagine it would be better to emulate it with hardware than with software. It would also imply that the hardware they plan on putting in the PlayStation 5 is significantly more powerful than the PS4's. Because let's be frank, they just don't think it'll work emulating stuff on the PS4. That's the reason they don't do it. It's not because they don't think people would use it, although there is some evidence now to suggest not a lot of people use it. I do think that enough people use it that it is a desirable feature on the Xbox One. 1.5% isn't necessarily a large amount of a gamer's time, but when you think of all of the time that we spend playing games, I mean, that's definitely more than nothing. If you played 100 hours of games a week, and I'm not saying you should, and you played 1.5 hours of a backwards compatible game, you've fulfilled that statistic. Also, part of the problem is just having access to older games. A lot of the time, people trade off older games and don't have them anymore. And you could easily buy them at GameStop, but why are we doing it that way when we don't really buy games at GameStop anymore? Like, their rental program would have been pretty sweet, but that got nixed like right away. Which leads us to the holy grail, the Netflix for games. Someday, there's going to be a big central computer that spends all of its time making sure that all of the old games don't get destroyed and we have access to them at any given time. Someday. And we'll call it the Netflix for games because, I mean, we aren't that creative with naming things. It'll probably have some goofy name, like PlayStation Now. Kind of. I don't know. That's basically kind of what that is, except for just PlayStation games. It's not, all of the games from your childhood. I do actually think this is something that if more emphasis were placed on and older games were made available easier, this would be a significantly more used feature. I think that it gets de-emphasized because I think companies aren't necessarily confident that it's something that they want people to expect from them because they don't always know if they can do it. That being said, if we actually celebrated older games for the works of art they are, perhaps it would be a little bit more prioritized. But we tend to forget, and even though we know that we used to have a whole lot of fun with X game, and we know that we would like the Xbox to play X game, when we're given the ability to, we just don't get reminded of it. There's not a marketing campaign, there's not people reminding you that that game that nobody makes any money from anymore is available to play now. And I think it's right to end this video with a general call to take game preservation, the idea that we actually want older software to still be around years from now, a little more seriously. This is where we're at a crossroads. Do we sit back and hope game and hardware companies will continue to give us access to their old stuff, all the while asking us to pay for it again every single time it's added to the next new console thing? Or do we focus on valuing what we have and hoard classic game consoles, keeping them in good shape and enjoying them? There are folks and organizations out there working hard to create archives and genuinely preserve games, but as consumers, we're in the middle. Say you want to play Resident Evil 4. Again, maybe you prefer the old-fashioned feel. Head to a game store and pick up a copy of the original GameCube game. Maybe it's in your personal library. Or maybe you're okay paying for convenience and you don't mind buying it, say, on PS4 or PS5 or whatever. Every player and every consumer is different, so with that being said, what games would you play if you could always easily go back? Which part of the backwards compatibility fence do you fall on? Let's have a discussion on that in the comments. And if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on GameRanx.